Well, hello everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Crypto Guardians podcast, where we discuss all the topics around crypto security and the guardians that are keeping you safe in the Web3. Just as a disclaimer, this is not financial advice, legal advice, life advice, or advice of any other kind. So please use your best judgment when listening and understanding what we provide to you. That all being said, I am very pleased to introduce this week Ouriel Ohayon, who is a French-Israeli entrepreneur, formerly the co-founder of AppsFire, a popular mobile app discovery and promotion service, as well as Isai, an early-stage fund. He's formerly the general manager of Lightspeed Gemini Internet Lab, an Israeli VC investing in early-stage internet startups. Ouriel is also an investor in eBuzzing, Outbrain, iView, and Ginger Software, and founded the French version of TechCrunch. He has graduated from HEC Paris and from CMS Master, and clearly has been a busy guy, now helping keep us safe in the crypto universe. Well, Ouriel, thank you so much for joining us, and we're very pleased to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
Excellent. Well, just to get us kicked off, you clearly have a great depth of experience across, PR and marketing and startups and investing. Like, you've done kind of everything. So what led you to create, a security-focused crypto wallet? Like, how did you get there?
Yeah, so let's get started with the obvious. I'm probably the last person you want to listen in terms of security advice, and I'm absolutely not technical. So how the hell do I end up in a situation like that? And the answer is actually quite simple. I think in terms of security solutions, there is a lot of options on the table that are technically available. I mean, the number of, especially here in Israel where we are based, which is called like Cyber Nation, there is like an immense amount of people, very, very smart, very talented in cyber, in protection, in all sorts of fields. And that has not started with crypto. That was way before that, and that will be way after that. Mm-hmm. The problem, though, is that when you come to crypto, it's not just about the technicality, about the security solution, but about the user experience, because it's one and the same, and it cannot be separated. And so one thing that I grew to learn over 2 decades of tech is what can make a great user experience work, so that the point of friction between getting started and getting engaged into whatever solution is pleasant, is usable, want to be, used over time, etc. And my own discovery of crypto was precisely the opposite of that. I could find a lot of technical solutions that were partially relevant, but absolutely unusable. And I think the reason why we are where we are today in crypto 12 years later is that because there is a dominance of solutions that are technically relevant, but that are irrelevant from a user experience point of view. And so what am I doing in that space? Well, hopefully we are trying to kind of reconcile the two ends to meet the technicalities of solution with great user experience. And so what we do at ZenGo, and the philosophy of ZenGo, is that UX, user experience, is security, and security is user experience. So I'm only half at best of the brain of this company. I have a co-founder who is a brilliant cyber researcher and very respected in the field. And so together we are building this company.
Excellent. No, man, he is truly brilliant, and I know the source of so many of the innovations you've done. But that's a great commentary and a gift to kind of come in with. We always talk about in product the beginner's mind, and I think if you were one of those people who read, the early white paper and been building for the last, more than decade, it's almost hard for you to have the beginner's mind anymore. And you really need someone like you who really has a deep understanding of people, really has a deep understanding of product to approach this space and really say, hey, like, this doesn't make sense for, everyday people, and is a challenge. I also love, the commentary that it's, usability and security really do go hand in hand. I see that every day as a security professional too, when you build security that is unusable, you effectively make it useless. People will just not use it. We see that with, hardware keys and all sorts of other cool security toys that we have that nobody uses because they work really well, but they're really not usable. So I love, you talked about kind of finding the difference and And it really is embodied with you and your co-founder that you've kind of come together to provide the two sides of the same coin. Well, tell me, like,
Pun intended.
What's that?
The two sides of the same coin, pun intended.
Oh, yes, yes, that's true. Exactly. I love it. Well, tell me, like, how did you two find each other? Like, how did you make that match between those two? Because those, what's hard is when two people are so different and they think so differently and they have such different skill sets, oftentimes it's hard for them to come together. So how did you meet Tal, and how did you get together to create ZenGo?
So it just started at the beginning. I was just alone with an idea and a dream. I was obviously incompetent in the field of security, and it was unimaginable for me to get involved into that adventure without someone of his caliber. So although I was falling in love with the problem, I could not see myself doing that. Mm-hmm. And I had like rough idea of what I wanted to build as a user experience, but I was incapable of imagining how technically could be done. And so what we do here at ZenGo is we build a wallet which is built on multi-party computation on MPC, mm-hmm. which reduces the risk of losing seed phrase because there's no seed phrase and no private keys, and where the default setup, and the word default matters, the default setup protects you order of magnitude of any other solution that requires add-ons. Mm-hmm. And so I needed someone that could help me think through the solutions, the technicality of the solutions. And I knew that it was going to be someone with deep know-how of cyber. So I started to look around me. And when I get an objective, I usually get to the result by being persistent in the search. It's not easy because just for the context at the time, no one knew me in crypto at all. I was really completely out of the radar. My idea looked like already baked and solved 1,000 times because at the time there were already hundreds of wallets, including some big ones. Mm-hmm. So who the hell would like to go and build something in that space? Anyway, the point being, I started to speak with a few people, pointed to my co-founder Tal. And I always remember in the first meeting, the day before, he shoot me an email saying, look, I'm happy to meet you, but heads up, it's unlikely that I'm going to get involved in anything you have to tell me. And then I said, now I start to love this guy. And so I met him, and it was like a great first meeting, and a conversation started to go. Now, to be clear, before we created the company, we worked on the project for nearly a year without funding, without company, without employees, without investment. So we got to know each other fairly well, especially in periods where you don't have resources. Mm-hmm. Like you really see the abyss very, very close every day. And so we started to get to learn to work with each other. Mm-hmm. And that turned out to be a great adventure. We're still here 5 years later. Just to be clear, we had another co-founder was an expert in the field of cryptography, mm-hmm. who started early on to join, and at some point decided that he wanted to leave to create his own company. So now he's replaced with another cryptographer, but we were three at the beginning.
Oh, that's amazing. And this was back in 2017 then, is that kind of roughly right?
That's correct.
And it's amazing. And looking at ZenGo now, where it's such a feature complete product, and it's kind of like you've got all the different connections, and you're building just like security upon security upon security layers. So you guys are just far ahead of, I think, really anything else I've seen. What was the MVP though? Like, what did you guys work on for that first year to get from nothing amidst, like anything else? There was 100 wallets then, like there's 100 wallets now. So it's always kind of been a noisy marketplace. How did you go from nothing and, just you and Tal kind of like cranking away into something that was better for some segment of some audience than all the other things that were out there and had been evolving for at least, 7 or 8 years at that point, right?
Yes, that's correct. So our first MVP was extremely embarrassing, mm-hmm. But it had a magical property. It was ugly, it was slow, it was unusable, but yet it was the first wallet that we could build. So at first it ran on the computer, by the way. It could not even run on a mobile phone because it was so slow. But on the computer, we could create a wallet that could send and receive, at the time was just Bitcoin, without the necessity of generating a private key corresponding to a public key. And it was basically generating two separate secrets. They obviously were on the computer, but they were generated independently. The code was proving that. And we had the first usable MPC wallet that could send and receive Bitcoin without using a private key. And for me, it was eye-opening. Like when we started, just to set the context, At the time, MPC was nowhere on the radar. Today, it's a buzzword. Everyone is using it.
Only this year, by the way. Really, it's only a thing that's really come to consciousness this year. Just to give context for folks, like,
correct.
Imagine 5 years ago, you're building this. I'm sure you guys, this is like something out of a security research paper at this point that you're building only on a computer that no one else has. Now it's a building block. So just to set context, how incredible that is.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. When we started, there was like on this huge mountain to climb because there was really no code base. There was no open source library. There was really nothing. The only game in town was a company that now called Unbound, was acquired now by Coinbase. At the time, that was doing commercial MPC for banks, and that's all there was. So we really had to start from scratch, and so we had to create our own library, which we decided to make open source day one. And that was the moment of the ugly MVP for us to be convinced it was possible to do it. The first MVP usable product called ZenGo happened a year later. So there was a lot of work to make a crypto wallet, and the wallet was doing very, very few things. It could handle Bitcoin, Ethereum, send, and receive. That's it. It was not doing everything that we're doing today. And so we went down a big rabbit hole since then. But that's how it got us started, but also how it got us noticed. The wallet in its capabilities had no magical power, but it had a true magical moment, was the onboarding process. Everyone knew that when you get started with a wallet, you have to write down the 24 words or 12 words or whatever, or worse, set up some sort of multi-sig or a smart contract that costs you a lot of Ethereum. In ZenGo, in like 10 seconds, you could get in without remembering any password. It was passwordless, it was seamless, and it felt magical. So we capitalized on that point of differentiation to grow from there.
That's fascinating. And maybe it helps a little bit. I know for us, we talk about MPC all the time. And for listeners, our last episode was about also someone, Jay, who is a PhD and works exclusively on MPC protocol. So we may be mired in that. But for newer listeners, can you explain a little bit about, go all the way back 5 years ago? Like, why was that important? So you mentioned the onboarding. There's also, I know, a security element. Like, tell us about the state of the world before this existed, and then kind of how this enables this new state where you can onboard without seed phrases, and it's much more secure, and like it's just clearly the thing to do now.
Well, the state of affairs today has not very much differed, because the problem is that there is this narrative that is entrenched into the culture, the crypto culture, that if this is not your keys, this is not your coins. Mm-hmm. And so what does that mean? It means that if you do not hold that seed phrase and that private key, well, then you are in trouble. Okay, but the reality is that if you hold those keys, you are in trouble. How do we know that? Well, because people have lost tens of billions of dollars ever since. So that obviously doesn't work. And this is why primarily people prefer custodial solutions, where there is a different set of problems, but at least you don't need to live with that hammer on your head, knowing that under the mattress, and that's an image, of course, but under the mattress, there is all this money depending on you. And so that doesn't work. And that didn't work, as it still doesn't work today, obviously. But at the time, I could not imagine as a user, and again, I'm starting from the point of view of the user and the user experience, that you would have to go through that painful steps, but not just the steps of the onboarding, the pain of having to live with the risk associated to that day and night. Mm-hmm. And that this crypto economy was going to become this massive thing, and everyone was going to happily live with that terror and that fear. And so I could not imagine that, and not for technological reasons, but just psychological reasons. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to build something that was radically different, where you didn't have to, you would still keep the control, or at least most of the control on your key, on your coins, but without the necessity and the hammer of having to live with those keys to handle. And the problem number one is that those keys can be lost. They can be taken over and stolen by third parties, and it is still happening every day. And the number one risk that we still see happening is human error. People thinking they're doing something right. They're writing the seed phrase on a piece of paper, or they're putting in a place that they believe is safe, and at some point it's not. Mm-hmm. And so this thing is the thing that we wanted to change. We wanted to build an idiot-proof system, so that it's reducing the scope of I can make a mistake from 100 to virtually zero. And so that was really as the game changer. And I still believe it is the case today.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. When I think about the future of crypto and really where it needs to go, I really think about the credit card. Like the credit card truly for me is, at least in the United States, like one of the most foolproof systems that exist where you can lose it, it can be stolen. Loss liability is limited to $50. You almost never pay that. It's a thing we use and we don't even think about. So that's a great goal for crypto to kind of move towards, and for all the builders out there to really think about how hard it is now to deal with, securing your coins, transacting on the blockchain, and then compare that to how easy it is to get a credit card where they're just mailing them to you now, and you really sign up a form, you can be ready to go in 2 minutes with no risk. And so, Ouriel, tell me, with that view in mind, how does MPC work to accomplish that, right? How does that work? And what's kind of the compromise between, full key ownership where you've got all this risk, but all this control, which I agree with you, like it worries me even for the little bits I have in full self-custody. And then the world of centralized finance that we know has some other risks, watching the implosion of FTX and many others that will go unnamed. Like there's now this spectrum. So tell me, like, where does MPC, where do the ZenGo users fall in that spectrum? And why is that a good place to be for them?
So basically today you have to pick your poison and decide how you want to die, right? You have to decide if you want to die by suicide or if you want to die by murder. Okay, that's basically the two extremes.
I love it.
Suicide is like you get your keys, you get your coins, fantastic. But then, and you don't know it day one, at some point something bad is going to happen. You either going to make a mistake, and the problem is not the solution itself, is the way you back up the seed, is the backup. That's the weakest link in the solution. Doesn't matter how great is the software or the hardware. So that's the poison number one, how you back up the seed. And at the other extreme, you have the murder, meaning you trust someone, you think he's a trustable party, an exchange, centralized party, doesn't matter, because it feels like a bank, except that it can behave very, very adversely to you and basically start to spend your coins without your permission, or start to censor your transactions, or start to steal your funds. And we've seen that example many times last year. So murder or suicide, what do you prefer? And so we believe that there is a third way. And that third way is provided by MPC. MPC is bringing the best of both worlds. It allows you to keep the control on chain. So it's not segregated into a custodial database in a closed systems. It is on chain. You can see at any time where your funds are. Only the user can start transactions, can recover their account, can decide how a transaction is made and when it's made. However, you are delegating part of this responsibility of the recovery and the transaction signing to an entity that cannot be a liability to you, but it's there to assist you. So what does that mean in terms of user experience for the user? You just download an app, you sign up with just an email. Any email doesn't have to have your name on it. You approve that magic link that we send you via email. You scan your face with a biometrics on the phone, which is done privately and anonymously. And it will generate a code on your cloud drive that you control that will allow you to recover 100% of your account in a new phone if you lose it. And that's it. That's the experience. And so all of that is very, very simple. It's very also hard to lose because, you need to lose your email, you need to lose your face. And, those two things are really hard to lose. We also created fallbacks for those two things. So very, very hard to lose. But more importantly, it's virtually impossible to take over. If you think about traditional wallets or even exchanges, all you need is the password. It's a single factor protection by default. The single factor in the traditional wallet is the seed phrase. If I have a seed phrase, single factor can spend your wallet. If I have your login and your password in an account, can enter, spend your funds. Of course, you tell me you can add a second factor, right? But that's the point, is what is the default? The default is that you're protected better because it is multiple factor. So in traditional wallets, you are single factor. In traditional exchanges, you are single factor. So we are creating a scenario where not only it's passwordless, but by default, And very important to understand that it is multi-factor, meaning very, very hard or virtually impossible to take over and to steal your account. So that's how it works. Mm-hmm. And that's where MPC plays a role into that kind of spectrum of death, if I may say so.
No, it's good. Yeah, you definitely, if you lost your face, you probably have other problems you got to worry about.
Well, we have a solution for that. You
really?
Can add you can add a secondary trusted face. And just to be clear, since we are between serious people in matters of security, MPC has also limitations, and people need to be also aware of the limitations of MPC. So maybe we will talk about that, but it's not like just like this magic wand that solves every problem. All security paradigms have their limits, and MPC has those as limits also.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And we'll dig into that next. Before I did, though, I wanted to dig in a couple things you said I think are really important for the security audience to think about. The first one is that, you said kind of MFA and two-factor, which we all know are important, but those are often very different in the way they're implemented and the way you describe them implemented for ZenGo versus maybe your traditional. You're not saying, hey, let's rely on a text message to, my local telco carrier, which, by the way, is fairly unsecure. I personally put the exploit cost of that around $10,000, and that's pretty charitable. So I generally tell people, if you're going to keep more than $10,000 in your wallet, do not rely on that. The second thing I really like is when you talk about the segregation that you offer with your security servers, you guys really are a key store, right? That really is what you are. You're not a holder of funds. And so all of the abuse we saw in centralized finance tended to come of the flavor, as hacks aside, because as you said, there's limitation, hacks happen, people lose money, and we try our best, but it happens every once in a while. But most of them we saw were actually temptations, right? They were kind of in the murder category where you gave someone this big bag of money that they could do whatever they wanted with and intentionally were reinvesting and playing some other games. And the incentive always is, if you're holding that money, especially if you're not a legally responsible and regulated custodian, is to go maximize that investment. Because if it goes well, you're a hero. If it goes badly, you go out of business, you go turn around and start another company. Not saying that's right. I'm just saying that's what happens. And so you do not want people with that incentive. If you think about a multi-party custodian, all they have is the keys. They don't have the coins. There's not even really a way for them to use it. So that temptation, that structure is completely gone. And then the third security threat to really think about here that I love about MPC is, phishing. I've been finding all these very helpful pages where I can go connect my wallet, and all I need to connect my wallet is offer a seed phrase or, give it my private passkey repo or something like crazy like that. And to security professional, it's obvious, but I would say 90% of crypto, even crypto users, let alone the average population, have no idea what that means. And we'll just kind of happily click through this phishing. And if that happens again, MPC will be a way to really hold that back and stop it from happening. And I'll tell you, having worked for many years in phishing, we run, one of the largest anti-phishing networks with Safe Browsing. We stop, in the order of, 5 or 6 million attacks a week, with very well known, this is something that's been going on for decades. So the population is very aware of it. With crypto, we're all on the other side of it. So it's just going to be 10 times worse even than phishing. So, okay, that all being said, what kind of reasons I love MPC, reasons I think it's a critical technology, reasons I love the implementation that ZenGo particularly has used where you'll really take it seriously. You're not, you're not cutting any corners, which is really great to see. Let's talk about the limitations, like, no security layer is perfect. We always think about it as, defense in depth. So what are the limitations and what should users be thinking about in terms of those limitations to really keep, all of their money safe?
Yeah, so the first obvious one is obviously ZenGo, as you said, is a we don't like to use the word keys because we don't want to be simulated with private keys, but we are a co-signer of transactions. And that means that technically we could, if needed, we could, or if we wanted, we could block transactions. We could basically say this transaction doesn't go through. And that's against the principle of censorship resistance. So if someone really cares about absolute control, which comes with absolute liability and responsibility, then they should not use ZenGo. And that's okay. We're completely fine with that. But just for the record, in the space of 4 years of operation, that has not happened a single time, but that could happen. So if you are afraid of that possibility, you shouldn't use ZenGo. The second thing is what happens if ZenGo disappears. Okay, how do you sign my transaction? Are my funds going to be in jail in the ZenGo system? Because I need to sign transaction, but ZenGo needs to co-sign it so I can move my funds outside. And unlike a seed phrase wallet, there is no exportability with just a code that you put it to another wallet, at least not today. I'm sure it will arrive at some point. So what do we do with that? Well, we knew it was a critical element to address, and we have mitigated from day one. We have created a service called the guaranteed access that if for any reason we were to stop operating completely, there would be a takeover by independent parties that are not related to ZenGo in any way and that are able to trigger a process that is documented on GitHub and that releases back to every single users their individual private keys this time so that they can export them to the wallet of their choice. So I'm simplifying a little bit the process, but the thing is ZenGo stops operating, a verification process happens. This verification process, when it's done, triggers a recovery system back to the individuality of each account. And then each user can take the reconstructed private key out of the 2 secret shares and move to the wallet of their choice. So that's kind of the safeguard here. And then you have all sorts, of course, of other security issues that could happen, like, for example, internal malicious operation. But I would say here we're not very different from any other wallet. If a wallet wants to push a malicious build that suddenly is going to, for example, change the direction, the addresses to which crypto is sent, then no one is safe against that. The only good news is that ZenGo is an on-chain wallet, meaning it's incapable of spending the funds of its user, unlike an exchange, as you mentioned.
No, that's right. I mean, to the first point, I mean, it's great to see that you can block. Because I mean, crypto, any financial transaction, like any fraudster, the real goal is to take the money and run. Like you want to get it out of the custodial hands and like out into the ether where you can start to play around with it as quickly as possible. And if the worst thing is just stopping, that really isn't that bad. That's actually good. That's actually exactly where if anyone who's on the threat hunting side or defensive side, that's exactly where you want to be. Every instant,
it's a feature, not a bug.
Totally. Like if every instant ended up with the gates locking and everything shutting down, that's kind of what every security professional who's lived through a major incident probably would wish would happen. One thing you mentioned there, hey, there's a censorship risk. How do you think about that geopolitically? Because I know, I live in the U.S. You're in Israel. Like we always think about every country has a different thought process on this. Like, how do you think about, where that's domiciled, what laws govern that process? So what country could say, hey, you're not allowed to send money to place X or Y? Because I know, again, living in the United States, we have OFAC and, agree or disagree, all kinds of opinions about what countries and what places we can send money to that we have to abide by. So how do you think about that for you guys now, as well as in the future when you become, I know ZenGo is growing like crazy. And you're going to more and more places. So it's becoming probably a larger and larger question. What laws govern censorship or your operation as a legitimate company versus as, if I was a random person with my keys doing whatever I want?
So let's start with the basics. ZenGo is a non-custodial wallet. And as such, we are not falling under the regulation of any particular country, because eventually the transactions are in the control of the user and the funds are in the control of the user. And as you said, not custodied by us. So if you're looking, and we did like a fairly in-depth legal research, there is no legal framework that applies to wallets like ours. And so that's point number one. Point number two, it may evolve in the future. That's something that could happen, and maybe at some point the regulator of particular countries or all the regulators will say, well, that the game is over for non-custodial wallet. You now have to operate under a certain license, and that license obliges you to do checks on all the addresses, incoming and outgoing transactions, and report them if necessary. So that's something that could happen. It happens already today when someone make a purchase of cryptocurrency or a sale of cryptocurrency, because this is the law nearly everywhere, but doesn't happen yet at the transaction level. So until it happens, it won't happen with us. This is not a process that we are following, because no law says that, but that could happen. I think it will eventually happen, because I cannot imagine that the regulator will let all this money flow through all these wallets and will not want to have certain guarantees. They're obviously cracking first on custodial services because it's possible to do that, and it's the shortest to do. They also have the names, they have the licenses, they know where they sit. But for non-custodial, I think it will be probably the second step. I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Finally, it doesn't mean that we don't receive from time to time legal orders, but we've had the case a few times, and every time we answer the same thing. Like, there is nothing that we can provide about the profile of that user because we don't know who they are. We don't have names, we don't have phone numbers, we don't have addresses, and so we can't help you. And so they verify and they see that. So anyway, the point being is that until now, the legal frameworks have not applied to us in a way that would constrain our operation. That being said, if that was to change, well, we would follow the law. What can I say? That's, you have to be either in the law or outside of the law.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen being inside the law tends to be better. I really, really worry about the centralized exchanges that are still operating kind of at the fringes of the law. I won't name them, but we probably all know who they are, who are not regulated, who are not really subject to anything. It's enabled rapid growth, but growth to me at like unlimited risk. And so, a couple of things that are kind of interesting about that. One thing I heard is that you really are you're a tool, not a custodian. I think that's a great place. When we think about this in the SaaS world under, say, GDPR, which tends to be what the world standard is, we think about it maybe as a processor versus a controller, where the primary obligation is to do exactly what your user tells them to do with their data. And that's it. So really all that control lives with the user. And in fact, even when regulation comes, you might actually be protected by GDPR because you have a very strict obligation to just do exactly what your controller tells you to do, which is kind of a nice place to be. The second great lesson I took away from this, and thing that I've learned over time, is do not keep data you do not need. I think that, I'm sure, especially you've got some background as a marketer too, there's some temptation to like gather more data about your users so you can market. There's definite value in that. And having explicitly resisted that in order to provide this layer of defense of not keeping this data, I think is really a powerful message, and one we should all really think about as we're building these companies. Really, I think it also shows how serious, you all are about security, because that, I'm sure, was a deliberate trade-off that you probably could have made some more money doing, but you resisted to create a better product and a safer product, which I thank you for. That, again, just one of the other reasons we should, have high trust in the way you're operating the organization. The second point that was kind of interesting, I want to dig into a little bit more, was, you mentioned this process for recovery. Like, can you tell me how that works? Like, is that on chain? This is actually something I apologize, my research hasn't covered as deeply. I read the little explanation of it, but is it on chain? Is it a contract? Like, how exactly does that operate? Assuming, God forbid, a meteor hits you and like everything is gone overnight. Like, it really is something very sudden. How mechanically did you set that up? Because again, it's something I just want people to think about, especially security builders, and creating these autonomous, decentralized systems that will survive, even apocalyptic events.
Yeah, well, if there's an apocalyptic event, there will be nothing to recover.
Yeah,
we'll
exactly.
all be gone. But let's assume that this apocalyptic event affects just ZenGo for some reason.
We hope that never happens, but yeah.
Exactly. But, there is never 100% certainty about anything. Yep. So except taxes and death. So Anyway, in that matter, so I assume you're talking about the recovery in case of ZenGo disappearing, right?
Yes,
not the recovery process.
Yeah.
So the way it happens is that in every single app, there is actually not just the version of the, so when you do MPC, you have two secret shares, the client, the user, and ZenGo user, the server. Okay, but what happens in reality is that in ZenGo client, there is not just the user share, there is also the encrypted version of our share. Okay, so it's encrypted. I could get an explanation of how we get encrypted, but it's there, and so it's harmless if the client gets taken over because it's encrypted.
Yeah,
and so what this recovery process does, it allows the secret share to be decrypted, okay? And those two shares follow a protocol which together are going to reconstruct a private key that's going to be serviced into the client. So you will get notified into your phone, hey, ZenGo is now closed. Here is the reconstructed private key of your account. You can use that into any other wallet. Adios, right? So that's basically at a high level how it happens. And so if ZenGo stops operating, the entities that are doing the verification of existence of ZenGo have the technical capability to trigger this process. There is a GitHub that is documenting that process, and that is able to call every single client encrypted share and decrypt it thanks to a master key that is held by the two independent parties. That master key in itself is useless. You can't do a thing with it. It can only be used in that context, and is able to decrypt our secret share on the client of the user and reconstruct the private key so they can move to another wallet. So that's how, at a high level, how it works.
Oh, it's very cool. So it's almost like, I guess those verifiers really only have the power to turn the ZenGo client into a self-custody client. Like that is basically the trigger.
That's right. That is correct.
I really like that. And that does seem like highly resilient. I also like at kind of every step, the external parties really only have the control to like give the user more control. Like really that's the only path forward, which I think is very cool. And I know we're getting near on time, so I definitely want to hit a couple other topics, just kind of going deeply into, security. You're doing, but you're not just stopping at MPC. I know we spent a lot of time talking about that. I mean, you have kind of call it like the 3FA, you've got the Web3 firewall, you just got an amazing grant from the Ethereum Foundation. Like, tell me more about, maybe start a little bit with the threats users see beyond MPC, beyond simple key custody, and all the things that not even all, you probably don't have time for that, but just a high overview of some of the things you're doing to kind of go deeper into the space to really make it, totally dummy proof, totally safe, well beyond any just the MPC problems, but into all the different threats that users face in Web3.
So ZenGo is three major innovations: the key management with MPC, the authentication with three-factor MFA that is completely passwordless and allows you to get authenticated and recover your wallet without having to remember anything, making sure that only you can access your account. And finally, the transaction protection, what we call clear sign, so Web3 firewall. So what it does? Well, this is a problem that is now well known in the industry with Ethereum and other smart contract blockchains. When you want to interact with an application, you have to give a permission to that application to use the assets in your wallet to use that application. Typical example, you want to buy an NFT or you want to mint an NFT, you have to give permission to a marketplace like OpenSea. And from there, you can either mint or buy an NFT on that marketplace. The problem is that when you do that, you're basically signing a blank check to that application that can do whatever it wants with it. It's like unlimited approval, as if instead of like wiring $100 to a friend, you were basically granting him the login and the password to your account to withdraw the money that he needs, but in reality can take away everything. And that's how Web3 has been built forever. DeFi, NFTs, and that's a major problem. That's a loophole that attackers have exploited at will. And also, it has to be said, sometimes even legit developers that make errors are going to poorly code their application and that are going to cause errors to the user. What is the problem is that it is impossible today in a normal wallet, no names, to really understand what you are approving, because that signature is unreadable to the human. But worse, it's impossible to understand what is going to happen with that particular transaction. Yeah. So what we decided to build is a service and an interface, both matter, that is capable of analyzing what is about to happen and to render it in a human readable way in the context of the wallet. Now, when we released that clear sign, we were the first company in the world to approach that problem because it was serious enough. Fast forward today, you have tens of vendors that are offering that. The point that is being missed is that it's not just a technological solution. Going back to the first point of the conversation, it has to be baked into the context of the wallet, in context of the transaction. It cannot be something that is an add-on. It cannot be an extension. It can be a toggle in the wallet. It has to be right there when you do it. Otherwise, you will miss it. And so the innovation of ClearSign was not just to bring that in, but also to bake that into, to bundle that in to the experience of the wallet. And so that has multiple level of depths because there is all sorts of transactions that you need to protect and all sorts of ways to sign signatures. Last week, we pushed an EIP to improve off-chain signatures, which is a very risky type of signatures. You think you are just signing, authenticating to an app, but you are actually listing your NFTs for zero, and then it can be purchased for nothing. That's what happened to Kevin Rose 2 weeks ago. So that's a new example of a case that was not covered 6 months ago that now has to be covered. And then there is transaction simulation, which is the grant that we received today from the Ethereum Foundation, allowing to understand exactly precisely what is assets are going to go out, what assets are going to come in. So the depth of that problem that needs to be solved is fairly important, but the solution makes sense only once it is fully integrated and bundled into the wallet. And that's why we decided to approach it that way in a vertical manner.
Yeah, it's so powerful. I was reading Kevin Rose, Twitter storm, after that came out, he was trying all these different tools. It's funny, like how challenging it can be to like have a user navigate and the users were talking about how they were having to layer, an anti-phishing tool, a transaction simulation tool. And like even by the Kevin, who's, founder of Moonbirds, right? Like really smart guy, been in big.com. Like for folks who don't know him, he's kind of a pillar of the technology community. He's done some, I don't know, like 30, 40 years. He's been there forever doing great stuff. Super smart guy is trying to piece together these things. If he's struggling, I think we have little hope. So we love to see it bundled natively into a security first wallet. The other thing I actually want to talk about, speaking of wallets and kind of nearing the end of our conversation is, how should users really, think about choosing a wallet? Because as we mentioned, we'll show this quick graphic here, and this is from G2 Crowd. It's just a kind of a public rating source that allows users to rate wallets. By the way, you can see ZenGo here all the way at the far right. So congrats.
Nice.
That's gonna make you smile. And again, leaving aside which wallet it is, as users, maybe you'll give two answers, one for the early stage user, one for the advanced kind of advanced crypto user. How should they think about picking wallets? Wallet names aside, how do they think about picking wallets? How do they think about adopting these solutions and just generally keeping their crypto safe? Like if you were, let's start with maybe, I don't know, I was thinking about my parents. I gave, my parents their first wallet. I kind of get them on board. How would you think about them discovering this and picking a wallet just on their own without, support from anyone else?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the way you make any important decisions in life. When you choose to buy a car or a house or choose a bank, you make some research prior. I think in matters of choosing a crypto wallet, the important thing to understand before you make your choice is whether you feel comfortable with the security experience that it's going to offer you. Mm-hmm. Because I don't think there is one size fit all. I think some people will be extremely comfortable with hardware wallets and seed-based wallets, and some people will be extremely uncomfortable with that. The problem is that today there is a uniform narrative that there is only one way to do crypto security. And the problem is that it hides severely all the other trade-offs, namely choosing a hardware wallet. And I think there are other ways, and many people are uncomfortable with that choice. They don't want to live with that responsibility. They don't like the user experience, no matter how popular it is. So I think it is important to have the awareness of the options. That's number one. And how do you have the awareness of the options? You do some basic research. And when you find 2 or 3 options that seem acceptable to you because you have read about them, you have read the reviews about them, it's very easy to find those information. Public reviews are fairly available. Then you need to understand if you are going to feel comfortable with the security trade-off of each solution. My recommendation is to have a mix. Of solution. You should not have 50 wallets. That's insanity, but it's a good idea to spread and to try multiple until you find the 2 or 3 that you're going to end up using a regular basis. And it's a good idea to spread your risks across different systemic approach to security, because if one fails for whatever reason, not everything is taken into one basket. That being said, today ZenGo as one way of servicing customers with its great security model. But this year you will see more approaches that we will offer, more options that will be extremely attractive to people who are highly security minded and with high net worth. So I think there will be models that will be modular based on who you are and how much you want to kind of secure. It's obvious that if you want to just secure $10 worth of Bitcoin, you don't need to have a very complex multi-sig setup and a vault at home and whatever kind of complex lawyer system in case of what happens if you die. You can just handle the risk, I think. But it's a very different question when you progress into your net worth. So my recommendation is learn the options, be aware that they exist. As you progress into your net worth, diversify the solutions that you use, but always understand the limitation of each one of them.
Yeah, it's great advice. And by the way, exactly what I do too, where I'll have wallets that are, hot wallets, easy connected, browser enabled, like there's very small amounts of funds in those. There's medium ones, like the MPC wallets that are powered, has a little bit more, it's a little more accessible. And then I have stuff, proverbially under my mattress or in the basement. For those listening, it's not actually there, so don't bother looking. But there's somewhere else totally disconnected. I don't think I've touched them in 5 or 6 years. Like I actually probably should do a test them just to check to make sure it still works. But really, they don't go anywhere near a computer, and I'll only take them near a wiped computer. So it's good. I love that point. Segregating your risk. And then as you have things that have more interaction, you then, by the way, that applies in the exact same way to personal finance, where credit card is very low risk to users, small amount of money. Then you have your checking account. Then you have your investment accounts, and generally try not to share your investment account information. Checking account, a little less sensitive, a little less money. And then credit card, who cares? You're probably covered no matter what. And then, as you think about, more advanced users doing things in DeFi and active trading and things like that, is there any advice you have from them on custody beyond those basics, which I think are good fundamentals for everyone?
Well, I would say that it's important that whatever you do in DeFi, you need to really be careful with what we're doing, because the surface attack is so broad and so deep. And so it's very, very easy to make, it's actually way easier to make a mistake in DeFi and Web3 than by just like holding a Bitcoin in a wallet, because you are going to interact with it at a higher frequency. And most of the time, those are new protocols, new services. They look attractive because they are lucrative. And so the attention to the gain makes you forget the basics of like precautions and security 101. Yep. And so very easy to forget what you do. So the only advice I would give to anyone doing for Web3 is don't go fast. Really, like those 3 words, don't go fast. Take your time. You might miss on 1 or 2 points of gains, but it's like, there is zero reason to move very fast. The only problem is that sometimes there are critical reasons to not miss and go fast. I'm referring to time-based events like minting. When you want to mint a collection, that something can go really fast there. And so if you have to go fast, my advice is the following: disconnect everything, be in a quiet room, turn off the phone, turn off the rings, don't be angry, go to the bathroom before, like be available to the moment. Yeah. So that you will give your best chances to not make a mistake.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I mean, that's probably as good of a place to end as any, where, in crypto, probably with all things, move slow, and if you have to move fast, focus on it. It is great things to think of for security, for finance, for anything you do pretty much in life. I think it's good advice. Well, Ouriel, I really appreciate you taking the time. This was a fascinating conversation. I love talking to another person who is, so deep in security. And by the way, at the beginning, you said you're not deep in security. I don't believe you anymore. This is a great conversation. Well, I took away like 5 or 6 lessons on how I should think about, architecting security, especially for our customers architecting it. So I want to thank you again, man. It was a true pleasure speaking with you.
I really enjoyed the conversation, and thanks for the in-depth approach to security.
Excellent. Well, take care. That concludes this episode of the Crypto Guardians podcast. We'll see you all next week.